Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter where you are in the world. We're happy to have you here. Kayla, how was your weekend?
It was awesome. I got to go sit on the beach and just do nothing. I was on Father's Day, so I had to wrangle the kids and do all that, but it was great. How was your
The
weekend?
beach in Boston?
Marshfield. Well, they call it Marsh Vegas. Don't ask, but it's South Shore, heading towards the Cape.
Like, I'm just like, that seems cold, even this time of year to me.
Yes, it was cold. I will not lie.
Then I'm down here in Louisiana and it's like over 100 with the heat index.
Yeah, our it was I think it was around 80 degrees on the beach with like the wind and everything, but the water was still really cold.
Yeah, that makes sense. I had a decent Father's Day. All the kids came home, which is a rarity these days since, two of the three live out on their own and have, real lives outside of mom and dad. So
Yeah.
definitely was nice to have them home for a little bit. Um, so let's go ahead and get started. So everyone else, welcome to Criticality Live, presented by our partner Secure Nation. It's a show where we like to cut through noise, challenge assumptions, and talk honestly about the state of cybersecurity because we are cyber unfiltered. We have a truly amazing guest today. I met him about a year and a half ago at an event, and he's just one of the best minds out there on this topic. So today on Criticality Live, we have Sam Alva. He's the director of OT security at Nova Coast. This is going to be one of those things where it's not one of those guys who I read an OT white paper once conversation. Sam's lived at the intersection of physical security, cybersecurity, critical infrastructure, and mission risk. He served at CISA on the Protective Services Advisory, Cybersecurity Advisory. He worked on OT around the world, doing physical and cybersecurity coverage and help critical infrastructure operators think about what really happens when the world attacks. He's also, retired Air Force, my man. Uh, he is a former Phoenix Raven, you know, and has served with the 177th Information Aggressor Squadron. They are the red team folks for cybersecurity for the Air Force. An NSA certified red team person conducting full spectrum, so both network and physical assessments against DoD units. I'll tell you that I spent some time working with the 421st out of the Warfare Center on Fort Dix, and I can tell you that I still have my black cover. Those who know. And when I hear Phoenix Raven, I know exactly how serious their background is, and those folks are absolute badasses. So it'll be fun to have a conversation with Sam on that. So today we're going to be talking about what really matters to defend environments where failure just doesn't mean downtime. It means legitimate consequences. So Sam, welcome to the show.
Good morning or mid-afternoon. So this is my first time live, so I was a little bit nervous, but you guys are literally, this is awesome. I love from the music to the intro. You guys were talking, and I didn't even know that I really looked at the bottom. It said backstage, I'm responding to you because my in-laws are from Boston. And so I know what you were talking about, the water being cold, warm, water being cold. And I'm talking, and I'm like, wait a minute, they can't hear me. So this is cool. I love this. Yeah, this is awesome. I appreciate it. And thanks for the intro, Josh. I was like, man, he looked me up. Yeah, the Phoenix Raven stuff. Yeah, it was funny. I was talking to, I was at dinner a couple weeks ago for my wife's birthday. And my wife, for the longest time, my wife used to tell me a story. And all my stories were Phoenix Raven stories. And it's funny because I take it for granted. I need to start writing them down. I need to have my notebook, because all the stories I had, doing South America trips, overseas trips, like the craziness that happened that you don't really tell, and again, we weren't, it was very interesting, all the stories, and I forget that part of my life. So, but yeah, no, thank you for having me on today. I was looking forward to this.
So we do like to start kind of at the beginning, how you got here, where you are. And, as I kind of highlight, you've done physical security, you were in the military, you worked with CISA, you've had cyber advising. They all kind of stack on each other. And that kind of tells me that you have a really interesting origin story. So let's take it back to the beginning. What pulled you into this world, and when did it click for you that security wasn't just a job for you, but it was the lane that you actually wanted to be in?
So it's funny you say that because when I was in the Air Force, of course, I started off as a security forces. Actually, I did. Sorry, let's scratch that. I started off as a combat controller. I spent 6, 7, 8, 9 weeks as a combat controller. Don't ask me why I went there, but I actually did that for about 9 weeks. I ended up quitting because I'm thinking to myself, this is not what I really want to do. Got into security forces. And, again, security forces wasn't really it was, I was back then, I don't know if you remember, but remember when law enforcement and security was different. That's when I came in. It wasn't a joint thing. So you had your rivet watchers, and then you had your LE, and I was LE. In 97 came, or 96 came to McConnell Air Force Base here in Kansas. And about 2000, the Raven program, a friend of mine was part of the original Raven program. And every now and then he would just leave. He would just go someplace. And I'd be like, dude, where are you going? You know what I mean? And he would I can't really tell you right now, blah, 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 blah. And then at one point in time, they needed more Ravens. And at the time, the Raven program was, you brought something up, Fort Dix. And that's where the original Raven training was conducted at. And back in the day, you had to do the Army PT test, the OG Army PT test, meaning you had to run 2 miles in under 14 minutes. It was push-ups, sit-ups. It was very rigorous. And there was other things you had to do in it. But anyways, my Raven number is 496. So I was the first 500, and the first 100 are usually reserved for cadre. Anyways, did Raven for about, from 2000 to 2003. I actually was a Raven during 9/11, which was very interesting. Again, tons of stories, Joshua. It's just funny you bringing that up. Actually, we were one of the first people that were pulled out of the military and stuck on airplanes because there wasn't enough air marshals. And that was another interesting story. We got sent to FAA training for 2 weeks as a crash course, and so we flew around all around the world doing air marshal duties, which was pretty interesting. But that transition was where I was like, I'm done flying. I don't want to do this anymore. I became a security manager, and that's kind of where the transition came into part. I was the guy that did security clearances, did criticality, things like that, and I really liked it. I liked it so much. I got a degree, and I got a bachelor's and a master's in security administration. Loved it so much. Then at one point, the military says, all right, Sam, we need you to become a dog handler. And I said, I don't want to do that. I'd lost friends as dog handlers. And I said, no. So they said, all right, we're going to boot you out. So they booted me out of the military because I didn't want to cross train. And it was honorable. They just said, hey, okay, if you're not going to cross train, we're going to let you go. Went into the Air National Guard. And the Raven Phoenix program saved my butt again because at the time they couldn't get enough Ravens. So I'm not sure if you're familiar, Joshua, with AGR program. So I became an AGR. Didn't know it. People were congratulating me because I was like, I hit the lottery, and I was like, what do you think? I don't know. But I realized I got a really good position. Well, a friend of mine, and I'm gonna name his name because he's the guy that kind of changed how I thought about things. His name was Bart Brown, and he's like, hey man, I'm in this cool program. And I said, what is it? And he goes, we break into stuff. And I said, seriously? He's like, yep. And so he's like, apply for the position. I applied, got it. And that kind of changed my world. The red teaming world, it definitely changed my world because initially I thought to myself, I'm going to be breaking into DOD facilities and I'm going to get caught. And sure enough, I did that for 12 years. And it was that's kind of what changed my thought process, is social engineering. And back then, we would do what we call OSINT, and 100% of the times we would dupe a DoD facility through their network, and then we would come on the physical side. Did that 12 years. When I retired, I thought, you know what, I'm going to go be this big bad security consultant. That didn't go so well, but I think it was a plan. I think that was on purpose, that I was supposed to fail, because that's when I got into OT, or back then cyber physical systems. And I had to feed my family. And so I was installing, access control, HVAC systems, surveillance systems, building automation systems, everything. And at the time I think this sucks. I call it the dark ages. Getting electrocuted, blowing up control boards, understanding milliamps and ohms and AC, DC. And it wasn't until I did that for about 6 years, and it wasn't the greatest part of my life. And it wasn't until I joined CISA, and I thought to myself, holy cow, not only was I doing things wrong, but I learned so much that they don't teach me. There's no school that teaches you how to do OT, and I get this response when I go out and I do training, and I get the head nods, because these operators and engineers out there, they have a very special skill set. When I helped CISA build their OT program, we built it off 3 disciplines: knowledge, skill set, and ability. And to me, my own personal opinion, you have to have those 3 disciplines to truly be an OT practitioner in this day and age, because a lot of times you could go get all the knowledge you want, but unless you know what goes into installing a control board or a PLC or an RTU or whatever the case may be, how can you truly provide remediation recommendations when you've never been in that environment, never stepped on a manufacturer floor, or a water wastewater facility, or a substation? I mean, all of these things are critical. It's funny that I was a buddy of mine from California. He's like, Sam, he goes, do you have any information on cyber physical systems? And I said, you know what? I actually do. Back in 2020, the CISA, the cyber physical systems were talking about CPS. And I helped CISA develop 3 courses. The first course was the cyber physical systems fundamentals. And I sent him a copy of it. And he goes, and it's funny because this was written in 2021, and I'm going through this information. We're having the same issues, Joshua. Literally, I'm going through something I wrote 5 years ago, and we're having the same issues. Anyways, helped CISA build their OT program. The Doge came in, and I realized that, as you could see, CISA was decimated. I took the early out. I was one of the first people that, when I got the email from Doge, I hit replied, yes. People are like, Sam, they're not going to let you leave. And I said, why? He said, because you're building this OT, but they're not going to let you leave. And no joke, once you hit that accept button, you are out. I mean, they started the process. Within 60 days, I got the onboarding to leave. I went to the state. I helped build the state of Kansas' first OT essentials course. And so the governor said, you know what, come work with us. And I felt like I went from the pan to the fire, because I wanted to finish my program. And so I left the state, and they weren't too happy. I hope that I could rekindle that relationship, just because I feel I think I can continue to build out their OT program. But then that's when Paul from Nova Coast and a help from my old 177 partner Tristan, he's like, hey, let's talk. And so a few months came about, and Paul's like, what do you want? I said, I want to finish my program. I want to completely finish it out. So he's like, okay, build it with us. And so that's where I'm at. We have a full, complete program. But before I left CISA, one of the things I did help was, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the cybersecurity performance goals. It's a CPGs for CISA. So before leaving, I helped build the OT CPGs. And so, which was great, is they actually released it in December of last year. Unfortunately, CSAs or PSAs haven't administered it because it's not available, which is good, because my boss called me up and he's like, yeah, he goes, you developed them, start using them, so they're free. So anyways, that's where I'm at. And it's been I felt like I've been with Nova Coast for 10 months, but I felt like I've been with them for 3 years, and it's not a bad thing. I just felt like I've been moving and shaking. And I think I'm seeing an uptick in OT threats and vulnerabilities. And yeah, that's kind of where I am right now.
That's incredible. Especially, like hearing about the OT side. I deal with a lot of clients in my day to day, and a lot of them have OT environments and they're not secure. And trying to find a professional who can come in and who really truly understands the depth of OT security is rare these days. Do you have any suggestions on how folks can upskill in those areas where it's so desperately needed?
It's funny you say that. So recently, I'm on a working group with NIST. We meet every Friday, and we are revising the 82R3 to revision 4. And one of the biggest things that have come out, or what they're wanting, is building automation and control systems. Because I believe building automation and control systems could be the Trojan horse in most OT environments, because the attention has been on industrial control systems and PLCs and RTUs and that world, but we have totally negated the fact that building automation and control systems, HVAC, access control, energy management, irrigation, elevator. I mean, we're talking. I mean, most buildings you go into, they're completely automated. Yeah. And what oversight or management is being applied to that environment? And I think, again, when I train people, I talk about industry 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, 5.0. It wasn't until 3.0 or 4.0 is, and I'm a nerd, but I think the nerds kind of screwed things up, because we applied gateways and edge devices not knowing the vulnerabilities. Like I mentioned earlier before, 2023, prior to March 2023, no one knew what OT was. And so to me, it's educating people. For example, that fundamentals course, the biggest issue we have is the people that are the first line of defense in that environment need to be educated about that environment. Kayla, do you know what I'm saying? They're the first line of defense, and yet they get very little cybersecurity training in what they're doing. The only thing that they're doing is their job is production and process. That's it. They don't understand network architecture, MFA, all these things. So a lot of times those things to them are nuisance, because they're like, oh God, I gotta change my password again. You know what I mean? There's a guy I follow, and there's one of the guys I respect, Mike Holcomb, and I love watching his stuff. And because he's an engineer, he's an operator, he's in the field. And everything I tell people, because a lot of people will come, like, Sam, how do I learn what you know? And I said, follow Mike Holcomb. I said, learn everything he has to tell you, then come talk to me. Because I ain't gonna lie, OT is boring. I mean, if you read IEC or 82R3 or all the ISO stuff, it is dry. And you know why it's dry? It's because unless you understand the taxonomy and the nuts and bolts of OT, it's very boring. Or you're just like, God, I don't want to do this. I've had people, I send them stuff, and they're like, Sam, just send me the footnotes. But it's education. It's educating the people out there. I get it all the time, where you have vendors out there to where, again, they saw the vertical and they're like, okay, let's create a new dashboard and slap OT on it, and now we're going to sell it. And I'm like, you can't do that. It's not that easy. And they're finding out that it's not that easy, because a lot of these dashboards, what they're doing is, and I feel that we're misdiagnosing risk in OT. And why I feel that way is that when you look at risk responses, there's mitigate, avoid, transfer, and accept, right? To me, in OT, there are only two options. You can't transfer, in a lot of circumstances, you can't transfer OT risk. You can't. It's like telling an insurance company, hey, Jaguar just lost $7 billion. You think an insurance company's gonna pay $7 billion? No.
Yeah.
Avoid it. You can't. That's our legacy systems. You can't avoid legacy systems. Over 50% of the OT environment is made up of legacy systems. From an IT perspective, those systems are garbage. But you know what? You talk to the owner, the asset owner, they're going to be like, no, we have to use that device for another 10, 15 years. You see what I mean? So there's two options. Either you mitigate it or you accept it. That's it. There's only two options, you know? And then there's a lot of things out there that we see as far as like, how do you assess it? You know, you can't use, I just saw something earlier today, and it's so funny because I've been discussing this thing for years, but the CIA triad, you know, confidentiality, integrity, availability, and they're like, oh, it's availability, integrity, it's AIC. And I'm like, dude, forget AIC. Let's talk about safety, health, and the environment. Because when I was a Fed and we would go out and I would do assessments in OT environments, which at the time I was probably one of the only people within CISA doing it. That's how you assess it, because, you know, like I always talk about community lifelines, right? Water, energy, communication, transportation. But look at the top three: water, energy, and communication. Out of those top three, which one of those have redundancy, right? Communications has redundancy. Energy has redundancy, right? Water doesn't have redundancy.
Yeah.
It doesn't. There's no redundancy. And if you look at how critical water is to technology now, like data centers, a lot of people don't realize how much a medium-sized data center consumes a day, like 250,000 gallons of water a day. A large data center, 5 million gallons of water a day. You know, look at agriculture, look at hospitals. These sectors can only last hours without water. But yet, you know, you look at our water infrastructure, trying to get money to protect that is like, it's like getting, you know, juice out of a prune or whatever that's saying. You know what I mean? It's just hard. And people are like, Sam, you know, do you live in paranoia all the time? And I tell people, don't confuse paranoia with being prepared. One gives you confidence, the other one takes it away. I'm not paranoid, I'm prepared. Yeah, I have backup water, I have non-perishables, you know what I mean? And it's not because I'm paranoid. It's because I understand how critical and vulnerable our critical infrastructure is. You know, I see the tea leaves when CISA's putting out stuff and telling people recover. And it's every now and then you'll see somebody that will say, are you telling us that the government, that we've already been breached? And I said, somebody you know,
Did we lose it?
And well, I heard somebody say, but anyways, but yeah, it's I just feel we're improperly prepared. I feel that when we look at defense in depth, people, procedures, technologies, I think that the industry is putting technology before people and process, and we're going to fail. We're going to fail miserably if we're not putting people and processes before technology. Technology can only remediate 10, 15, maybe 20% of your vulnerabilities within your environment. You know, truly understand the likelihood, the impact, severity. You know, those have to be done through an assessment. You know, people think that, oh, I bought this technology, I'm safe now. You know, and all times they'll call and be like, well, I still have to do an assessment. You still have to determine likelihood. You still have to determine severity, you know, and impact. All those things are crucial in an OT environment. You know, we're talking about RTO versus RPO. You know, I mean, just there's just so many different variables I feel that are not being addressed, and immediately people want to go out and buy, you know, the quick fix button, and I'm like, it's not going to work for you. You know, how many, you know, talking about AI, and I have a love-hate relationship with AI. You know,
everyone does.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like, but I always tell people, AI is not made for OT right now. You know what I mean? It's like not right now. I said, and you know why? It's because we haven't even established OT governance, let alone implementing AI and OT when we haven't even fixed the root of the problem. You know, it's like putting an exoskeleton on a 90-year-old person, and it's like, yeah, it's going to work. You're addressing the issues before we start adding AI into it. You know, there's so many People, when I used to go do assessments, a lot of times one of the questions I asked was, who in the room can go from
Oh, Sam, did we lose you? Uh-oh.
Oh no.
It's that weather in Kansas, I'm telling you.
Are we
Sam?
getting tornadoes again?
He's like, yep. And I said, that's great. Do you have it written down? And he would look at me and he'd be like, no, Sonny, it's all right here. And I'd be like, that's the worst place. You know what I mean? Because he's like 60, God forbid he slips and falls, and there goes your ability to go from digital to manual operations, you know? So that's the issues that I feel that, I try to be a voice. I try to not offend anybody, that's the reason why I love watching Josh's stuff, just because it's like, I love how he pushes the limits and says what he says. I would love to do a version of that on the OT side, because I know I'm going to offend somebody because they either have already purchased something or whatever, and they think that's going to be their fix, and it's not. I was 100. They had a recent thing on for manufacturing, and they're talking about man in the middle or man in the middle, man in the loop or man on the loop, meaning we're in Industry 5.0 already. We're working along with robots, and now they're still utilizing social engineering now to disrupt that. But how many organizations out there truly apply social engineering in their cybersecurity training to that level, to operators on the operating floor, and that's not occurring. I don't think it is. I think the OT environment has been surviving off of security through obscurity, because and we've seen it over time. I don't think they understand the architecture. I don't think our APTs and the threat understand the OT architecture. And I think they're learning more now. There was back when I used to do a training on risk, I used to talk about there was a 2,000% increase on OT reconnaissance. And reconnaissance to me is I hold it very close, because that's how we broke into government facilities. And mind you, we were 100% successful in breaking into the most secure facilities in the world. We took down USAFE in a day because we got somewhere we shouldn't have gotten into. Anyways, man, I lost my point, man. Oh, man, yeah. Sorry, right. Joshua. There was a point I was going to make with. You know what? You guys haven't said a word in this whole 20 minutes or 33 minutes. Joshua, you know what? I apologize. I just literally took over this whole thing. I just have so much to say. And
we love people who are passionate about the work they do.
Yeah, this is amazing, especially when it comes to OT, because I'll admit, to me, it's not a complete black box to me. I've been around OT engagements and things, but it's to your point, it's very much a neglected or afterthought aspect of security. 100%.
So one of the things I kind of want to,
and I think
pull on.
Go ahead, Joshua.
It's like one of the things I kind of want to pull on is folks don't realize how interconnected IT and OT are, even if the systems aren't connected. And that, back when I was still wearing a blue suit, I did a attack against a air operations center. So the unit that controls, the motions and the operations of a particular type of aircraft globally. And I didn't attack the IT systems. I didn't attack the people there. I went and found the HVAC system that ran their server room and turned their HVAC off.
Yep.
And when the servers fell over, then they had to shut down all air operations for 4 hours while they reconstituted another location. I didn't touch a single IT thing. I found the OT thing that nobody cared about, that had public-facing connections that were there so that the vendor could go in and remotely manage. And I'll tell you, the mapping system that it had inside the application was super detailed. It told me exactly what each room was and why the AC was set at that temperature and what it supported. And I'm like, oh, cool. This is the server room for this air operations center. I'm just going to turn the AC off. And that's the thing is,
Yep.
it didn't happen all at once. One server fell over. Then a few minutes later, another server fell over. So they thought it was a straight cyber attack. They spent hours trying to figure out what the cyber attack was because
Yep.
I turned the AC off. I used an OT attack on an IT system.
Yep. I just remember what I was going to make. Security through obscurity, that the threat actor familiar with OT architecture. And so I remember back in, and I remember I was telling you back in 2023 when no one knew what OT was, is back in March of 2023, the EPA sent out a memorandum and they basically said, hey, all water facilities require a sanitary survey, an OT survey. And the United States went out of their mind. And they're like, we don't even know what OT is, blah, 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 blah. So 3 states sued the EPA. And so finally the EPA says, you know what? In October 2023, they said fine, and they dropped the lawsuit. Guess what happened in of 2023? That's when all hit. Remember, I don't know if you remember that. And that to me was the first time OT was relevant because it became a vertical. And that's when you look at all these companies that selling OT stuff, it came in between 2023 and 2024, you know? And so now, you know, and again, because it was a vertical. And my point now is that we're seeing the same thing again. We're seeing that I remember the EPA sending me gobs and gobs of HMIs that they were able to look up through using Shodan, and they were sending them to me, and they're like, hey, you need to call the admin or whoever. And I would call these people in small rural water facilities, and I'm like, hey, your HMI is completely exposed on the World Wide Web. And they'd be like, what do you want me to do about it? And I said, you need to secure it. And they're like, I don't know how to, you know, and they're like, what are they going to do? And I said, they could shut off a pump. And he's like, I'll just turn it back on. But do you see the magnitude of that is? They could shut off a pump, and he's like, I'll just turn it back on. And now what are you seeing now? Now they're understanding where they just sent out a thing about the automatic tank gauges that controls hazardous chemical into environments. They're learning our critical infrastructure architecture. They're learning it more and more. So now what they need to do is they need to figure out how to shut off the safety instrument sensors, which will indicate if not enough or too much chemicals going into our water supply, chemicals, and then what? Now you're not going to know till 100 people get dysentery or whatever the case may be. You know what I mean? And yet we're still, you know, there's times where I tell people, hey, you know, have you looked? Yeah. But it's just very frustrating because the signs are there, and I think because like it's back in 2023 experience, and we've seen it. The FBI assistant said it, the NSA, CIA says we experienced large scale OT attacks. Like, oh, just throw asset monitoring on there and fix everything. And I'm like, that's one piece of the bigger. So I know it's frustrating.
We've seen that in the wild. Not only have we seen it in the wild, we've seen it to where a attack against a water system in Florida kicked off at 8 a.m. and then another water system in Arkansas got hit by the exact same attack at 8 a.m. Central Time. And it was literally the same attack with the same logic bug to kick off at 8 a.m. And we watched it go each time zone to water systems that were using the exact same PLCs, the exact same controllers, the exact same architecture. And because they weren't coordinating, they weren't using their, you know, water ISAC to say, hey, I have this thing going on, be on the lookout. Over and over again, you're seeing it fall from one side to the next.
Yep.
And all it did was say, okay, this worked in Florida. Now I'm just going to execute it across everywhere else because, to be fair, they're all using largely the same handful of like 5 or so water systems. You know, it takes nothing to go out on Shodan or Census and, you know, pull up Siemens or Honeywell controllers and figure out, okay, based off of where this is, this is probably what that is.
Yeah. The
Oh yeah.
critical
Well,
infrastructure.
and that's the funny thing is when you look at the amount of water and wastewater facilities across these, 92% of them under medium or lower sizes, meaning they don't have they're resource poor, as far as having a dedicated cybersecurity team or anything. So all of these recommendations that come out, and you're like, yeah, you need to contact your incident response commander. They don't have any of those people. so it's like you have to be able to customize the remediations to a large percentage of a threat or a sector, and that's the hard part. To me, it's like we have to. It takes a village to infrastructure, but we don't have enough people that understand that infrastructure. I remember when I did we got an award for it, but when I did my first OT Essentials course for the entire state, I traveled for a month around the entire state of Kansas, essentials to operators and engineers. And Joshua, I know you're like me, you're passionate teaching, but I love to see the lights turn on in an operator when I'm going over network topology and things that they're not familiar with. Because they work with it every day. And I'm showing them, and they're like, oh my God, yes. And they're thinking to themselves, oh my God, I got to go unplug the printer because the printer is connected to our machine that's connected to the SCADA system. You see what I mean? And most water operators don't get cybersecurity training when they go through operator school. That's the farming part. They did in the last 2 years. I don't know if that is the same for railway. It's the same for FAA as far as like people that are working in certain critical infrastructures. Understanding how the threat gets in. I don't know if you remember they did that congressional hearing about SATA. What have we done since then? And you have the same people on the board, and they're talking to Congress, congressional hearing, and these are all shocked. They're like, "What? We have done nothing for OT to secure it?" And you got to be kidding me! Like I'm like, put me on that board instead of the people on that board. You know what I mean? I'll tell you exactly. I responded to ransomware attacks on one facilities, and they're like, do we call our insurance company? No, what's your insurance company do? They only stole like 2 gigs of data. You know what I mean? That's not what's important. The important fact is that your water facility can only maintain manual operations for like 5 days, and that's your people working 24/7. You see what I mean? We don't. If you look at a medium to large size water facility, it takes 22 people to 44 people to operate that facility in manual operations. Do you know how many people they have? Half that. I saw them call Clarence back from retirement. Hey, Clarence, can you come back and just work for us for a little bit because we need your help? You know what I mean? Because they can't manually operate their environment without technology. But do you think the technologist that came and sold it said, hey, just FYI, this is like a 4-to-1, meaning that this solution is going to take away 4 bodies, but when you lose that, you still need 4 bodies. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's across the board in all these sectors. And we're not identifying that. We're kicking it up a notch, saying, let's add AI to it now. And now we're taking away more of that skill set and putting in an AI, which needs to be connected to communications in the cloud. AI is only as good as its connection. So it's frustrating because I'm not saying AI is bad. I'm not saying technology is bad. Plan in place, but most facilities don't have an OT specific incident response plan. You're seeing it more now, but they don't have one. So it's just, yeah, it is what it is, and we'll hopefully, people will find a way to, either I wish I was I could just pour water myself or eat after midnight. So, yeah.
Here's the thing: even if they have a plan, have they actually tested it and tried doing it? And the odds are probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Josh, I'll say it again. I didn't.
Okay.
It's probably my.
A lot of places are building those plans, but have they actually tested them? Have they tried to execute them?
Mm-hmm.
Probably
Yes.
not. A lot of folks, I built a plan and I did a
Yep.
tabletop. I said, we have this problem. I'm going to go do this thing.
Yeah.
Have you actually tried doing that? Like, you say that you're going to call CISA, you're going to call the FBI, and then you magically turn the page, FBI showed up. I assure you that's not how that works in real life. You know, you call CISA, it's going to be a few days before you get a body on the ground. You call the FBI, you might get someone that day, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
If you're close to a resident agent, see. But all our tabletops just go, yes, you're going to do this and this is going to happen. You know, to your point with the, you know, resource poor organizations, you know, those rural water organizations have 10 people that work in them. They're largely automated. They're running on a Windows 2000 server that's been never patched, rebooted twice, and everyone's terrified to do anything with it. And you say, well, you need to modernize it. Okay, so they're going to do a, you know, $20 million tax levy to replace this water system, because that's what it's going to take to upgrade that, because you can't just take the Windows 2000 server out.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing that works with the PLCs that they have that are, oh, by the way, 10 years older than that.
Yep. Well, and it's funny because as many water facilities that I visit, they keep their old PLCs, and they said we keep them because if something goes wrong, we just pull that one out, pull it one in, and leave the same configuration files in there. And so it's one of those things to where there's a part in 300, and I love movies, but there's a part in 300 where Leonidas meets up with another large fighting group, and the guy tells Leonidas, you know, how many people did you bring? These 300, and he goes, that's a lot. You're fighting the Persians. And looks at it and he starts asking people within his group, because this group is bigger. He's like, what do you do? And he's like, I'm a potter smith, I'm a baker, I'm a blah, blah, blah. And Leonidas looks back to his people and says, he's like, what are you guys? And he goes, and they tell, you know, and my point to that though is that we create more, and I think that's where, you know, engineers, or do they have? They're the ones that are going to a threat or the anomaly or the unusual behavior. It happens every time. Matter of fact, when I responded to Arc City water, it was an engineer. It wasn't a cybersecurity analyst. It was an engineer that says that blue screen doesn't look right. You know what I mean? And how they responded was different. I remember responding to that incident, and I remember.
Oh, Sam, I think we lost you again.
And I told the city manager, we need to contact public affairs immediately, and we need to control the narrative. I said, because that's what people, and they'll say, oh, something's wrong with the water. You know what I mean? And hey, and there's like, well, you could say that we experienced a cyber incident, everything is fine, because everything is fine, you know. But that's the difference between an IT and an OT response, incident response plan. You know what? You know, I told him, I said, hey, what does your water support? He's like, it supports a hospital and it supports a meat processing plant. And I said, have you contacted them and said, what are their incident response plans? And they just looked at me like I was speaking Mandarin, you know. And they're like, well, we've never had to do that. And I said, well, you should ask somebody. Matter of fact, I just saw something today where they're having a training, and I wish I remembered it, but you know what they're training on? They're training on just that. You're losing external resources. What are you going to do? What's your backup plan? We need more of that. We need to make more people uncomfortable in the OT environment to realize, hey, because you know what happens? You remember 9/11. There's so much money came up after 9/11, but here's the difference. Is OT is going to affect safety, the health, and the environment of U.S. citizens, and that's what people don't understand. You know, I have tons of stories about what it could do to our ag. You know, I mean, meat's already expensive now. What happens if that gets affected? I mean, we could see already happened when the Colonial Pipeline went down, gas going through the roof. So I mean, there's so many different scenarios. You know, hospitals can only last 2 to 4 hours before their services degrade. If they lose water, what's their backup plan? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so much things that people need to just address, and I feel that they're not addressing them correctly. Again, I think risk in OT is being misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
You know, you can't
To your
use
point with-
the normal things. Go ahead, Joshua.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, to your point with hospitals, most of them a well-equipped hospital can operate for 24 hours with no water or electricity. After that, it drops down to they're only doing minimum care, no surgery, no nothing, just literally come in, breaks, bumps, bruises, and that they're even farming off someplace else because water is a very large resource. When I say large, I mean volume. To store enough water
Yes.
to run a hospital, think about all the times they have to wash their hands, all the equipment that has to get run
Yes.
through sanitation. You know, autoclaves run on water. Like that's how they sterilize all
Yes.
that equipment. You know,
Yep.
that's a huge consumer of water, and they can only contain so much on site. And then if you don't have electricity to pump that water, you're done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's terrifying to think about, but it's a good thing that there are people like you, Sam, who are thinking about these things, and you know, you are bringing it to the forefront where you can. I think that's really something that, you know, for our listeners out there to be. Oh, I think we lost him. Oh, wait, no, he's back. Hi, Sam.
There you go. But yeah, I mean, you know, who says China won't help Iran? You know what I mean? It says, hey, you need some information to take them out, hurt them. Here you go. You know, same thing with Russia. You know, to me, I think the net.
Oh, I think I saw someone put in there like we're talking about their stuff and now they're messing with us because they know we're talking about them. No conspiracy theories here, right, guys?
Like, no, we're not talking about how OT is not managed properly.
No, of course not.
This is not the conversation you're listening to.
No, but I mean, I think it's really interesting because there is a lot of opportunity for improvement in the OT field, and there aren't enough folks who are focused on this
I lose you
area.
guys?
Yes,
Yep.
I think we got you back now.
Yep,
Can you hear
I'm back. Sorry.
Okay.
Or,
No.
or is he back?
Everything was going just perfectly fine. Yeah.
Oh.
So let's
You guys hear me?
kind
You guys hear me? Okay, there you go. There you go.
let's roll back in, and you know, I like unpopular opinions. I think that's been well established. What is your unpopular opinion about OT as it relates to all the things that we've talked about? Give me your top unpopular opinion.
Okay, give me an example on what that looks like.
So
like unpopular opinion is people are going to disagree.
Well, it could be that they disagree. It's might be something that, you know, people just don't want to say out loud because they think it's going to be disastrous to their career. So, like for me, I would say my unpopular opinion on OT is that, you know, it is highly underrated of how integrated it is into day-to-day life.
So my unpopular opinion is we have C-level leadership still trying to apply IT remediation to OT issues. Because they're looking, because my opinion is OT, if it hasn't already, it's outgrown IT from an interconnected and assets that are right now. And C-level groups are like, do you know how many times I've gone into organizations and they hire somebody within their organization And they're like, yep, he's our new IT guy. And so I'm like, great, you know OT. Nope, he knows nothing about OT. And I'm like, are you kidding? You see what I mean? And when you read every book, every guideline, every standard, the first thing they tell you is you need to assign an OT admin, somebody that understands it, you know. And my recommendation, okay, so there's my unpopular opinion, is that I feel that we still want to fix IT issues, or we want to use IT remediation to fix OT issues, and it's going to fail miserably. I think we are doing it unjust, and it's going to the impact may be severe.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. You know, there's lots of vulnerability in OT, and the IT answer to vulnerability is, well, just patch it. Yeah, patching is not how we do things in OT, and there's a plethora of reasons why, mostly because you're going to affect people's life and commerce by doing so if it goes horribly, horribly wrong.
Well, and here's the funny thing is, FIPS 199 is one of the only documents out there that actually kind of go through an OT impact. And you know what the impact is? It was severe, catastrophic. There's another, it's called CVSS. I think it's version 4. I found it because, again, I'm actually writing a book on risk and OT because there's nothing out there. And there's a guideline that's in there. And when you actually put in like just the knowledge that I have in water, it's the severity in it is 9.5 to 9.8, Joshua. 9.5 to 9.8. But yet we're doing nothing about it. That's the alarming piece. Like that sector is so poor. I mean, they donated. There's $1 billion that was given to the cybersecurity grant program, and most states, and again, I'm probably going to get yelled at. Most states haven't even adapted their application to apply. So when they're not even putting OT in there. Like most states don't even have an OT person. That wrap your head around that. I mean, I know Kansas hired me and I quit, but but most states don't have somebody within their organization that understands it from a critical infrastructure.
Well, so part of that,
it's just.
Let's say, when you look at part of it is some of these organizations don't want to know how bad it is, because if they actually know and they have a piece of paper that says this is how bad this is, then they actually have a legal obligation to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. You're right. Yeah. They have liability. But if their head's in the sand, they're like, what? Really? So, yeah. Oh, no. I have been, that's why a lot of times people didn't want the feds to go in and look at that, because they're like, because now once you identify it, now they're liable to fix it, because now if something happens, ergo they're going to have to, they're liable. So yeah, I agree. Yeah, and again, it's there's no and I feel like a therapist every time I go in there to talk about this, because I always have to tell them it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You know, I'm telling you how bad it is. I'm like, it's not your fault. I feel like Robin Williams and Good Will Hunting. You know what I mean? And I just want to hug everybody, be like, it's not your fault. We could fix this, you know? But we have to, it's like the 3-step AA process. We have to know that we are doing it wrong, you know? And a lot of the times, this is another scary thing. I was in a workshop. I did an OT discovery workshop, and Siemens was on there. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not saying names. There was vendors and integrators on there. Do you think they chimed in? No, they didn't. Because they know part of the stuff I said was right. Because 5-6 years ago, I asked these large vendors, hey, do you have a secure onboarding practice for your equipment? And they looked at me like I asked them for, you know, top secret information, but they didn't have it. And now all these companies, now they're the saving grace. Oh, you know, they're like all holy now, you know, and it's like, you're only doing that because you're being held to the fire now, because this is your equipment.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
yeah. it's tough out there, but I noticed we had a couple comments that came in from the chat. So for our listeners who want to follow your work or reach out to you, what's the best way to connect with you?
My Salva at novacos.com is the best way to reach out to me.
Okay, we'll make sure we get that out there.
And one of the things that we're trying to do, honestly, is, like I said, it takes a village to protect the environment, and I see it. I see it more and more, like even within our organization, we do a lot of like events where we do training, we do speaking events, but it's all related to IT. We need more of that in the OT. We need to bring, every time we've done things at the state level, we've had very strong participation and feedback, because here's the thing. If the better I understand your environment, the better I can help you. And that's the way it works.
Yep. That's great.
Because again, I bring all those disciplines. I always tell people the OT issue is we have a multidiscipline. It requires more, but we need an interdiscipline, all those disciplines, and put them together and have an interdisciplinary approach. That's the only way we're going to fix this. And I think that's the hardest part, is getting all those people in the same room and saying, but yeah, that's how they can reach me. And I plan on doing more of these. Hopefully, I would love to do something like this, Joshua, for OT. These are awesome. I love this. The way you guys do it is top notch. You guys, I feel like one of Joe Rogan's host or guest. So that's awesome, dude.
All right. Well, hey, on that note, that's a wrap on this episode of Criticality Live. Huge thanks to our guest, Sam Alva, and an even bigger thanks to you for hanging out with us today and being a part of our growing leader of communities who are done with buzzwords and are ready for real conversations. If you got value out of our episode today, hit the follow button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, because OT, people need to hear it, and drop us a review here on LinkedIn, Spotify, or on our on-demand YouTube channel. And of course, a huge shout out to our sponsor, Secure Nation, for powering our conversation today. They're helping organizations defend smarter, respond faster, and make cybersecurity something that actually works. This has been Criticality Live, where we keep the noise and take it on what really matters. See you next week. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.